The road outside the burned church town had been quiet since dawn. By 9:40, it was not quiet anymore. A column of trucks sat stalled at a muddy crossroads, engines idling, drivers leaning out to see what stopped them. In the middle of the road, a German soldier knelt with his hands raised. Nobody was shooting. Nobody was talking. The men standing over him gripped their rifles too tightly for a surrender already finished, and on his feet, laced the American way, were a dead man's boots. This is what Patton did when those boots nearly got a prisoner killed. It started as a surrender. Surrenders happen constantly in this kind of war. A man walks out with his hands up, gets searched, gets walked to the rear, gets fed cold rations, and asked questions by someone with a clipboard. That's the whole event. 5 minutes, maybe 10. This one had been going on for almost 40. The German was young, 19, maybe 20. He hadn't said a word since he dropped to his knees in the mud, and he hadn't tried to run, hadn't tried to talk his way out of it, hadn't done anything but kneel there and wait. He didn't need to talk. The men around him had already said everything that mattered, and they hadn't said it to him. They'd said it to each other. "Look at his feet," one of them said. Private First Class Walt Dressler said it, 22 years old, a driver from Ohio, and at that moment the only man in the half circle who looked like he might actually pull the trigger. The boots were American. Government issue. Laced tight. Double knotted at the top the way only an American soldier ties them. On a German prisoner's feet, in a French crossroads, 3 weeks before Christmas. That detail did not look like a coincidence. Second Lieutenant Roy Carmichael tried to do the right thing. First, 24 years old, knew enough to combat that this was his first real test, and he could feel it. "Step back," he told his men. "Bind him. Get him moving." Nobody moved with any urgency. A few men shifted their boots in the mud and did not step back at all. You have to understand how strange this was. These were disciplined soldiers. They followed orders all day, every day, without thinking twice. And right now, an officer was giving them a direct order, and they were ignoring it in plain sight, in front of him, like he wasn't even there. That's when Dressler said it. Not loud, almost calm, which made it worse. "Those are Eddie's boots." Carmichael didn't understand yet. He would in about 90 seconds, and after that, nothing about this would feel small again. 2 days earlier, on the same ridge, a single shot had come in from 800 yards out and killed Private First Class Eddie Holt, where he stood. One shot. No warning. Dressler had been his foxhole partner for 6 weeks. He was the one who found the body afterward, and he was the one who noticed Holt's boots were gone. At the time, everyone assumed scavengers had taken them off a corpse after the fact. Ugly, but not unusual, and not connected to any living threat. Nobody had realized the sniper responsible was still working this exact stretch of road. Nobody had realized he hadn't moved on at all. Corporal Sam Levin crouched down to search the prisoner for anything useful. A map, a razor, identification. And that's when he saw it. Stamped into the inner tongue of the left boot, faded but legible. E.H. Levin didn't say anything right away. He just looked up at Dressler, and Dressler looked at the boot. And that was the moment the temperature of the whole crossroads changed. This wasn't generic battlefield hatred anymore. This was a name, a face, a man they'd eaten breakfast with 2 mornings ago. The viewer might expect this to make the men monsters for wanting revenge. It doesn't. It makes them human. That's the part that's hard to sit with. Carmichael repeated his order to move the prisoner to the rear. This time, the men actually started walking, but slowly, loosely. No real formation, no real urgency. The kind of slow walk that isn't disobedience exactly, but isn't obedience either. Carmichael had no idea how to fix that with words. He was 24. He had never had to control men who wanted something this badly. Captain Earl Vance arrived at 10:15 and made it worse without meaning to. He confirmed the boots were Holt's. He said the prisoner was valuable, could identify gun positions further up the ridge, could be useful for intelligence if he made it back intact. Then he wrote that down. Vance always wrote things down. He left a corporal nominally in charge of the handoff and went looking for a field phone, leaving behind an order with no muscle behind it. The road was clear behind the crossroads. The convoy wasn't. Trucks backed up past the bend, drivers climbing down to see what the holdup was, engines running for no reason except that nobody wanted to be the one to shut down a column waiting on an unresolved prisoner. By 11 o'clock, word had crawled up to regiment, not because anyone there understood the danger, but because a war correspondent's jeep was stuck 4 trucks back, and someone didn't want that story written. Regiment called it a potential incident requiring command attention. That phrase covered everything and explained nothing. A major at regiment phoned down and asked for a status update, and the answer he got back was useless to him. Prisoner secured. Situation stable. It was not stable. It was 40 minutes of men standing in mud deciding quietly whether they were going to follow procedure or not. The major didn't ask the follow-up question that would have told him that. He hung up and noted the time. That was the 3rd failure in a row, and it was the most dangerous one, because nobody at regiment was lying. They simply didn't know what stable was hiding. Behind the crossroads, the column kept growing. Drivers killed their engines now out of habit, then started them again when word came that movement might resume any minute. A sergeant near the back climbed onto his hood just to see how far the line stretched. It went past the bend, past the burned-out barn the locals used as a landmark, almost to the fork that led back toward where they'd come from that morning. Every minute the road stayed blocked, the Germans on the next ridge had 1 more minute to dig in, resupply, or pull back clean. Nobody needed to say that out loud. Everyone standing near that convoy already understood it in their bones. Nobody up that chain had asked the only question that actually mattered. What happens to this man in the next 20 minutes if nobody changes course? Patton was touring the sector that morning, checking on a different battalion entirely, when the radio chatter caught his attention. He heard stalled column, prisoner problem, and didn't wait for someone to summarize it for him properly. He redirected his own jeep before anyone at regiment had even finished drafting a report about it. The jeep came in fast, throwing mud off both rear wheels, and one by one the men noticed who was in it before he'd even climbed out. Engines that had been left running out of habit got quieter. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Everyone standing at that crossroads expected one of 2 things. Either the prisoner gets shot right there to end the holdup cleanly, or every man in the circle gets torn apart for letting it drag on this long. Nobody expected what actually happened. Patton didn't look at the prisoner first. He looked at the boots. Then he looked at Dressler. Whose boots are those? Not a question. A demand that already knew half the answer. Levin stepped forward fast. Sir, they belong to Private First Class Holt, killed 2 days ago. Same position. Patton looked at Brower for the first time. The kid didn't flinch from the stare, but his eyes dropped straight to his own feet, like he already understood exactly what was being looked at and why. Ask him where he got them. Levin translated. The answer came back flat, almost rehearsed, the voice of a man who had decided there was no version of this conversation that ended well for him, so there was no point dressing it up. He says he took them off the body. He says he needed them. Ask him if he killed the man wearing them. Brower didn't deny it. He gave a short answer, and Levin didn't even need to translate the tone of it. Guilt, without excuse. Dressler's voice cracked the silence. Then what are we waiting for, sir? Patton didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Brower. Ask him why he needed boots that bad. That question landed wrong on everyone standing there. It sounded almost like sympathy, and sympathy was the last thing anyone wanted offered to this particular man, at this particular moment? Levin asked it anyway. The answer took longer this time. Brower's hands, still raised slightly, even though nobody was holding him at gunpoint anymore, were shaking. Not from fear, Levin realized, but from cold. He says his unit hasn't been issued winter boots in 6 weeks. He says his own boots came apart in the mud 3 weeks ago. He says his feet were already frostbitten before he found the body. Nobody had asked that question. Not Carmichael, not Vance, not Dressler. Not anyone who'd had 40 minutes to stand around this man and decide what he deserved. The killing and the looting had fused into a single act of cruelty in everyone's mind. And they weren't the same thing at all. A sniper kill in this war is a fair kill. Taking a dead man's boots because your own feet are rotting in your shoes is something else entirely. Something closer to desperation than malice. That didn't undo what Brower had done. Patton didn't pretend it did. A kill's a kill, he said. That's the war. The boots are something else. He turned to Carmichael. Get a medic up here. Nobody moved for a second, because nobody understood the order yet. Now, Lieutenant. Vance started to make his case again. Intelligence value, ridge positions, the need to keep the prisoner cooperative for questioning. Patton didn't argue with him. He just didn't wait for him either. Rank wasn't going to fix this. Pressure wasn't going to fix this. Vance's intel argument hadn't moved the men an inch in 40 minutes, and it wasn't going to move them now. This wasn't a problem that lived in a report. The medic checked Brower's feet right there in the mud, in front of every man who'd been ready to lose him on the walk back 20 minutes earlier. He peeled back a sock stiff with cold and dried blood, and the skin underneath had gone the wrong color in 2 places. Frostbite. Early stage, both feet. The medic said so out loud, plainly, the way you'd report any other casualty, no different than if it had happened to one of their own. Nobody in that circle said anything. A few of them looked away from the prisoner's feet, the way you look away from something you didn't expect to see, and didn't want to. Patton turned to the corporal standing nearest the supply truck. Pull a crate. Get him boots that fit. The corporal hesitated for half a second, just long enough for Patton to notice. Now, Patton said, and the man was already moving before the word finished leaving his mouth. Then, without raising his voice at all, give the other pair to Dressler. Dressler didn't move right away. He just stood there holding Holt's boots when they were finally placed in his hands. The laces still tied the way Holt always tied them, double knotted at the top. He turned them over once, looked at the worn heel, and said nothing. Nobody expected him to. This wasn't a pardon. Nobody at that crossroads mistook it for one. Brower was still going to the rear as a prisoner who had killed an American soldier 2 days earlier, and Vance still got his interrogation later, with the man's feet wrapped and his head clear, instead of broken by men who'd had 40 unsupervised minutes to decide his fate. What changed was simpler than mercy. The Army was going to be the Army even here, even now. Even over a man most of them wanted dead with their own hands. That had to come from somewhere, and it came from Patton standing in the mud, asking a question nobody else had thought to ask. Carmichael gave the order to move out, and this time, the men actually followed it. Clean formation. No slow walking. Whatever had been holding them back for the last 40 minutes had nowhere left to live once Patton had stood there and looked at the problem straight on instead of around it. The column moved within the hour. No shooting. No cover-up that would have followed Carmichael for the rest of his career. No incident report climbing back up the chain with regiment's name attached to a thing nobody wanted their name attached to. What the men actually remembered in the months after wasn't a speech. There wasn't one. What stuck was the image of those boots changing hands twice in the same morning, off a dying German's frostbitten feet, into a supply crate, and back into the hands of the man who'd lost his foxhole partner to the man who'd taken them in the first place. Some of them told it as a story about discipline. Some told it as a story about a general who went soft for 10 minutes in the mud. The exact wording changed depending on who was telling it and how many years had passed since. But the shape of the morning never did. Dressler kept Holt's boots for the rest of the war. He kept the lighter too, the one he'd carried in his breast pocket since the day he found the body. He never wore the boots himself. He just kept them, the way men keep things that don't make sense to anyone but them. Carmichael went on to handle harder situations than that crossroads, and he later said, to the few men who ever asked him about it, that it was the morning he learned the difference between giving an order and actually being obeyed. Vance got his interrogation later that day in a tent 2 miles back, and the prisoner talked. Whether that had anything to do with how he'd been treated that morning, nobody could say for certain. Vance wrote it down anyway, the way he wrote everything down. Some men remembered the road. Some remembered the silence before Patton's Jeep pulled up. Most of them remembered the boots. One pair going onto a prisoner's feet. One pair going into the hands of a man who'd buried his best friend 2 days earlier. And a column that, within the hour, was moving again like none of it had ever happened. Was Patton protecting a killer that morning? Or protecting his own men from becoming something they would have had to live with for the rest of their lives? He never explained it that way to anyone standing there. He didn't have to. He just asked the one question nobody else had asked and let the answer decide what happened next.